Mike Lynn has over 37 years in the mineral exploration and mining industry, and he spent time with Anglo-American De Beers, MSA Consulting, and for the past 7 years, he's been an executive director at Newfields Resources. Mike has worked all over the world, and today he's going to talk to us about the history, geology, and development of the Tongo Kimberlites in Sierra Leone, West Africa. Mike, over to you.
Thanks very much, Tanya. So when John asked me to do this presentation, I thought a little bit about what the objectives are in terms of the audience and so on. I'm very happy to see we've got lots of students. So I thought I'd take a sort of broader look at Tongo. Jim mentioned earlier that there are no fissure mines outside South Africa. Very well, I would like to say that already we've sold our first parcel of diamonds. So already there is now a fissure mine outside South Africa in Sierra Leone. And Maya Mining up the road from us have a fissure near Koidu, which is also, well, they've sold some diamonds. I wouldn't say they're quite in production yet. But watch this space. That's two mines that will be very shortly operating. So let me start off, because I'm a director, actually, I'm not a director anymore. I've recently stepped down, but I'm still involved with the project. So I should just put in a little disclaimer at the beginning, because I'm talking about some resources and reserves and so on. So apologies for that. And then I just want to give some acknowledgement. Lots of people have worked on this project in the past. You can look at the list on the left there. I apologize for those that I've missed out. I'm sure there are many that I've missed out. But this project has been looked at in detail from a kimberlite perspective since about 2010, 2011. And many people have been involved. It's an expensive project to evaluate a fissure mine from the outset in terms of drilling and so on, which I'll show. So there have been many people involved. So a quick chat about the geological setting. So the little star, how do my pointer work here? Pointer options, laser pointer, there we are. So that little star there is more or less the location of the Tongo mine on the Man Craton, or the West African Craton, on the Archean nucleus of that Craton. And this work comes from Hugh Rollinson, published a few years ago. And you can see some of the Archean granitoids intruded by some greenstones and some later Archean granites. Some dates on those show the Archean ages are pretty old. And then this sort of 2.6, 2.8 million year granite, which seems to be quite common in all the cratons around the world. And then looking at some of the kimberlite clusters on the West African Craton, I'm just going to go through them quickly. So the one sort of outlier is the Wiasua cluster in Liberia. That's been dated at about 800 million years, but all the others are late Jurassic, early Cretaceous ages. Oh, sorry, wrong way. We've got the Drujba cluster, a late Jurassic cluster in Guinea, which is a small pipe, and a few other kimberlites that was looked at, I think, by Stellar Diamonds a few years ago. The Koidu cluster, which includes both Koidu mine and the Maya Fissure mine, also right at the end of the Jurassic. The Tongo cluster, which is what I'll be talking about, early Cretaceous, the Banankoro cluster up in Guinea again, and then the Buro cluster and two more clusters in Liberia and Guinea, early Cretaceous age, not properly dated as far as I'm aware. So those are the kimberlites. Most of those, apart from the Proterozoic Wiasua cluster kimberlites, are diamondiferous. and most have been looked at from a mining perspective one way or another. A word on the erosion history, because we're looking at dikes. Why are they dikes? Why aren't they pipes? So this is a map of West Africa with elevations shown on it. And I just want to talk about the erosion history as far as it can be established. Those little red dots in here, those are those same kimberlite clusters I showed you a moment ago. So uplift and rifting separation from South America happened around about during the period 200 to 180 million years. And the kimberlite emplacement, as I've said, late Jurassic, early Cretaceous age, a few tens of million years later. So erosion from the uplift of the rift shoulder occurred at around about 100 million years, most of that erosion at least. And then there were 3 episodes of Cenozoic erosion, totaling somewhere in the region of about 300 to 400 meters. So the total erosion of these kimberlites were in the Tonga area, certainly, and Koidu as well, is whatever erosion occurred during the Cretaceous plus 300 to 400 meters of Cenozoic erosion. So whatever pipes were present are really now only the root zones, and we do see some blows or small pipes at Koidu, and at least one that we have at Tonga has effectively been mined out already. And then further north in Guinea, you have some pipes preserved and some kimberlites that we found that I haven't actually shown on this map. Further south towards the coastal plain in Sierra Leone, which are just narrow dikes and not in fact diamondiferous. Just to go back to some work, remarkable piece of work done by a chap called P.K. Hall back in the 1960s. He did an exceptionally detailed description of the diamond fields of Sierra Leone, and this map shows what was then known as the Yengema area, which we would now regard as Koidu, in the north, and in the south, the Tongo area. And back in the 60s, they were being mined by Sierra Leone Selection Trust. And to the end of 1965, he estimated something like 32 million carats of production from Sierra Leone from both of those areas. That includes artisanal mining, so the SLST and non-SLST. Post that period, there's really no reliable production records. NDMC was the nationalized mining company that was imposed from the early 1970s. And I think somebody made reference to it the other day that that's a great example of what not to do with your mineral resources, because that was a period of opportunity lost in terms of Sierra Leone. And then we entered the blood diamond era of the late 90s, where there are no reliable records, but diamonds at that time were being used to fund all sorts of unpleasant things. But happily, that is now a thing of the past. Sierra Leone is West Africa as a whole, it's a very peaceful part of the world. And then since the Kimberley process statistics started, since 2004, up until I've seen the figures to 2020, a little under 10 million carats of diamonds have come out of Sierra Leone at a nice average price of over $260 a carat. So based on those figures, I can't give a realistic figure, but it's a lot more than $11 billion worth of diamonds have come out of Sierra Leone. So it is significant. The discovery of the Tongo Kimberlites. So again, I've used that little red star on this map to show where the Kimberlites are. So the diamonds were first found by prospectors from Sierra Leone Selection Trust in the early 50s, who followed the diamonds up the Woa River, the Male River, then the Woa River, and then into some small tributaries of those called the Tongo and Lower Lando streams, and those streams are actually overlying the Kimberlites, and they found very high grade alluvial deposits. And the Kimberlites were discovered shortly after that. And SLST then started eluvial and alluvial mining over the Kimberlites They produced about just over 1.5 million carats up until the end of 1966. So, and they were very nice diamonds as well. Then they were nationalized. As I mentioned earlier, records after that are very difficult to find. But even to this day, there's artisanal mining of material that's been processed probably a couple of times before, but people still recover diamonds. And then really no significant large-scale operation until Newfield took on the project in 2018. Koidu had the license and they certainly did a lot of drilling and so on, but they have decided not to develop it, and they've done a joint venture, effectively a joint venture with Newfield to take the Tongo Kimberlites forward. So a map of the Kimberlites themselves, all of those little lines on this map are Kimberlites. The black outline is the mining license, or 2 mining licenses. The little one to the northeast is owned 100% by Newfield. The larger one is owned by Koidu Limited, but Newfield have first right in terms of acquisition of that license. And the colors of the lines relate to the status of the resources on those Kimberlites. So the orange dotted lines are indicated and inferred mineral resources at +1 millimeter. The green are inferred resources at +1 millimeter, and then everything else is exploration targets and other Kimberlites. So just some numbers, and I won't go into this in detail, but you can see that the grades are quite high, around about 3 carats a ton on average. And the dollar per carat value at +1 millimeter, a little under $200 a carat on these Kimberlites. So quite nice quality diamonds, and I'll show you some of them a little bit later. The 2 Kimberlites in the center here, Kundu in the north and Lando in the south, those are the 2 Kimberlites that are being developed first through a decline, which is situated roughly where I've put the pointer at the moment. And I'll show you some pictures of that. And that decline, we've went with a decline rather than shafts, as Jim described in the earlier talk, simply because a lot of the area is quite swampy, and we needed hard rock in order to get into the Kimberlite. So it was decided that a decline was the best way to do that. So, so how do you establish those resources? Well, the evaluation process has been long and expensive, and continues and will continue. To date, there have been about 75 kilometers of core drilling, diamond core drilling. And if you imagine each one of those holes as an angled hole from some stepped away from the Kimberlite, angled to intersected at a depth of 50 or 100 or 200 meters or whatever the depth is. And the intersection of Kimberlite is really quite small from that long hole. So it's a pretty expensive way of collecting samples. Nevertheless, we've recovered about 2.5 tons of microdiamond sample collected and processed to date. I say we, that's as the project as a whole. And from those samples, over 11,500 stones have been recovered. Of those, 185 were technically macro diamonds. In fact, there's a picture just above on the one on the right there. Those are 3 macro diamonds recovered. They're plus 2 millimeter stones, those I think. Sorry, no, plus 5 millimeter stones recovered from Panguma last year. And all of those microdiamond results point to pretty high grades for these Kimberlites. We've also done bulk sampling, of course, because microdiamonds give you a grade estimation, but you need bulk samples in order to establish a revenue estimation for the diamond parcels. 3,700 carats of bulk sample diamond has been recovered and valued to date. And this is a map of some of the drilling that was done. So the first phase of drilling was done in 2010, a small little bit of drilling down here on the Pandabu Blow, which, as I said, was mined out by Koidu from surface. But subsequently, they then did a large drilling campaign at roughly 200-meter spacing. That's the yellow drill traces on this map. And then in 2018, Newfield came along and did some infill drilling at 50-meter centers in order to establish indicated resources, which we've subsequently converted to mineral reserves on Kundu and Lando. So this is what the kimberlites look like in some of those bulk sample pits. And a couple of things to observe here. One is that the kimberlites are quite narrow. Obviously, that's variable. And also, was actually not a terribly good example, but here you can see the dike. There's another bit of the dike over here. So many of the dikes, or many of the locations that we see the dike, it's not just one single dike. It's 2 or 3 or 4 dikes with waste rock in between. So to mine it, you would have to take out the dike, or we are taking out the dike and the waste rock in between. And Jim was very emphasized a lot these fractures parallel to the kimberlites. And obviously, when we mine these things, a lot of this material comes out. And I should actually have put a photograph in, but some of the wall rock from where we take the kimberlite out is beautifully smooth and very stable. Not all of it, but a lot of it is extremely stable, which is very nice because you can then take it out quite cleanly and not have to worry about too much more rock falling out. Of course, this is all granitic rock, so it's relatively homogeneous and stable. But wherever you have structural dislocations and so on, crossing the kimberlite, then things can start to get a little bit more difficult. So just a few key numbers from the evaluation work. So we have a global indicated and inferred diamond resource on all of the Tongo Kimberlites at the moment of 8.3 million carats. That's at a +1 millimeter cutoff. Our mineral reserve has been estimated at 1.1 million carats. That's just Kundu and Lando, and that's at a 1.18 millimeter cutoff. We took a slightly larger cutoff simply because the cost of recovering those smaller diamonds did not make sense in terms of the additional work to do it. The weighted average kimberlite grade of the mineral reserve, that's Kundu and Lando again, is 2.3 carats a ton. But the average diluted mining grade, and that's taking into account the dilution that we expect to encounter in mining of that reserve, is about 1 carat per ton. So in other words, there's a dilution of about over 100%. The diamond value in the reserve model is $222 a carat. That was done back in 2019, I think it was. But we did our first sale last month, in fact, of just over 5,000 carats. And we got $262 a carat with that sale. So fairly comfortable that the estimation in terms of the revenue is reasonable. And in fact, the diamonds, as I'll show you, are pretty consistent. We don't have a lot of large stones. In fact, we don't have any large stones, but we do have a lot of very nice smaller stones. The initial mine plan is an 8-year life of mine on those 1.1 million carats. You can see the capex and opex costs there. But obviously, with lots of kimberlites, and that's down to 200 meters, with lots of kimberlites to look at and extending that mineral reserve to greater depth, the life of mine is likely to be much more. So look at step in a bit closer on some of the kimberlites. So this is the Kundu kimberlite, and looking down at an exposed section, cross section. So you can see these are the kimberlite contacts. Here's the upper contact. I've got my marker on. There's the lower contact. And there's a lot of aphanitic kimberlite here, which really doesn't contain very much grade at all. And then you've got this highly macrocrystic kimberlite, which has a very, very high grade. So the kimberlite is quite variable throughout. So you see these aphanitic sections, you see these very highly macrocrystic sections. This is just two extreme end members that I happen to notice in one outcrop. It's not all like that. Here's another one, another good example of a very high grade core of macrocrystic kimberlite surrounded by this aphanitic material. And again, harking back to Jim's comments, these parallel fractures in the rock, which will inevitably come out when we mine this material. Petrology of these kimberlites is a little bit unusual. Leone, I think his name's Anton Leone, Andre. Anyway, I can't remember. Recently completed his master's thesis, I think it was, on some of these kimberlites. So the upper two images are plain polarized light images showing nice fresh olivines in a flogopite dominated ground mass. Now these are supposedly group 1 kimberlites, but there's a lot of flogopite in them. And also to the top right from the Kundu dike, again, very flogopite rich ground mass. And then below we've got the cross polarized images with there's an interesting olivine here for those that are like these things. Polycrystalline olivine, don't see that too often, I don't think. And also there's a lot of carbonate in this Kundu sample. So Leone regarded this as unusual petrology because the mica content is comparable to lamporites or group 2 kimberlites, but the perovskite and spinel is similar to group 1 kimberlites. So perhaps this is some kind of a mixture of the two. I won't venture an opinion on that because I'm not an expert on those things. One of the things that we had to do, this is a better example of these sort of multiple dikes with waste rock in between. So these are kimberlite dikes. There's a little bit of waste in between there. And then there's a big bit of waste and another dike over here. So when you mine that, basically all of this will come out. And in this particular case, there's really no major fractures outside those two. There's a bit of a fracture there, but that's all. So you can get a reasonable idea of what's going to come out there. Now, if you imagine intersecting that in a drill section, you will see lots and lots of little bits of kimberlite with waste rock in between. And these are mostly quite narrow, these zones, and they generally occur in a zone that's less than about a meter wide. This one's probably a bit more than a meter wide. So we map those thicknesses from dike exposures during bulk sampling and also from the drilling. And then to estimate the meaningful dike widths, those dike sheets are assigned a mineable zone. And you can see that we applied some rules there. So the mineable zone had to be 0.85 meters in width. That's the minimum stope width that we assumed. In fact, we think we can go a bit narrower than that if we need to. And all the kimberlite sheets that contained within that zone have to have the thickest intersection of a given dike, regardless of how much kimberlite is present. And then any peripheral kimberlite that occurs outside of that 0.85 meters would only be added if it contains at least a third, 33% kimberlite. So there's some little rules there that were applied because it's actually quite difficult to, when you've got a whole lot of different intersections with different types of or different quantities of kimberlite, to put that into a meaningful package to say whether you include it or you don't include it from your mineral resource. So that is the process that was applied. I've not seen dikes of this nature anywhere else, I have to say, in the world. They're usually a single dike. So this is a slightly unusual example. Perhaps others have seen similar things elsewhere. Oh, and I should also mention that what we assumed was that a minimum mining grade of 0.4 carats a ton. Anything under that was excluded from both the resource initially and then the reserve estimation. So this is a map of one of those bulk sample pits, and the reason I wanted to include this is it just shows how these kimberlites occur very elongate lenses. So this lens is reasonably thick through here, and then it pinches out into almost nothing. And then the dike steps across here, and it's very narrow here, and it starts to thicken as we go. And that's very typical of kimberlites. They don't just occur as a single unit. They tend to form these lenses that pinch out and then step and continue, which makes mining them a little bit challenging if you don't know where to expect them to jump. So this is, here we are, I thought I'd included a picture of it. So this is a picture of the kimberlite underground. This, the picture on the left is of the return airway, which is a tunnel, a 4x4 meter tunnel that's being developed above the kimberlite, and we've developed it on the kimberlite, or I should say above the mining zone, the stoping zone. We've developed it on kimberlite simply because it means that we can actually take some ore out and produce diamonds quickly. So you can see the kimberlite wall here. It's about 25 centimeters wide here. It's actually the kimberlite behaving itself as pretty much a single fissure, although it does split up into several fissures in places. And you can see this lovely smooth granite wall. So if we mined this kind of kimberlite in a stope, hopefully this would actually fall out quite cleanly. But this is not always the case. And that mine face, that's just the direction of this tunnel being developed. So the way we take this kimberlite out is we just develop, and then we basically peel this off the wall like an onion. And this is just a close-up of what that kimberlite looks like, and you can see it's nice and macrocrystic with these quite fresh olivines in it. So what do we do with all of that data? Then we put it into a mining model. We use data mine, and this is just some of the sort of parameters that you can derive from that. So the KZI, kimberlite zone thickness, and where we've got purples, obviously the zone is thicker. Where we've got greens, it thins out. And again, so that's sort of picking out this lens shape, if you like. And this is down to a depth of roughly just over 220 meters, I think, below surface. We can also map the percentage of kimberlite in the kimberlite zone. You can see over here, there's higher percentages of kimberlite than there are here. And what the grade of that kimberlite is, then that's based on the microdiamond data. So we can see over here, we've also got higher grades. So using that information, as the information derived from the drilling and the microdiamond samples, we can produce these fairly detailed maps of the grade and diamond distribution and geometry of the dike. And that then forms the basis for mine design and scheduling. So the mining method is, in terms of our mineral reserve, because you have to sort of say what you're going to do. So we've assumed an overhand shrinkage stoping, which if you relate that to what Jim showed us, that's sort of the work that was done in the deeper parts at Helam with the lower grades. And that's initiated. So these are the two mining levels. There's one here, there's one up here. It's initiated with a raise, and then you mine off in that direction, you mine off in that direction. But you have to keep a rock pile. I'll show it down here. You have to keep a rock pile because the guy with his little rock drill has to stand on this rock pile and drill up into the stope face so it can be blasted and then fall down, which means you can only draw a little bit of this material as you go along. If you draw too much, the chap with his drill can't reach to drill the next stope face. So it's it's not something I don't have experience of. I've seen it when I visited the Star Mine a couple of years ago, but it's something I don't have experience of. But we are talking to people with experience at Helaman, well, I guess associates of Jim and Jim himself, to look at alternative ways of doing this. So hopefully we'll find a better way of doing it, but that's the way that we have planned to do it to start with. And this is the mine plan for the Kundu and Lando Kimberlites. So I mentioned that there's a portal entrance and a decline between the two kimberlites. So you trundle down to a depth. I think the initial decline is about 150 meters. And then you split off into two directions, to the Lando and Kundu Kimberlites. And then all these little squares that you can see there are mining blocks within the ore reserve. And you can see that these kimberlites are not single panels. There's several different panels that make up the fissures. Some of them we've ignored, so we've decided not to mine that one. I think we've decided that we will mine that one, and we won't mine and so on. So not all of the kimberlite is in the reserve, just those portions which have well, over 0.4 carats per ton average grade. And that, as I mentioned, is the mine plan is to roughly 230 meters depth. But obviously these kimberlites don't stop here, they continue. So we can do later drilling to extend the resources and the reserves. There's just a drone view of the portal entrance then between the two kimberlites. So the Kundu Kimberlite extends roughly along this area here, the swamp, and the Lando Kimberlite just off here, going down towards the bottom left. We recently had, by pure fluke, a hydroelectric power line put in from Ivory Coast, goes all the way to Freetown, and happens to go right through our mining lease, just a few hundred meters away from the portal. So hopefully within the next few months, we'll be able to draw power from that hydroelectric power line. At the moment, everything is run by diesel. And you can see some of the other infrastructure. Importantly, we've got a waste picking belt. It's actually a misnomer. It's actually an ore picking belt because we pick ore rather than waste from it. And then just the other things you'd expect. The mine is still under construction, so there's a laydown area, offices, change houses. This was taken when nothing was complete. Most of this is complete now. All of our bricks and so on we make locally from the crushed rock and cement. So we've got an aggregate crusher there, and the magazine, of course, for the explosives over here. I should add, Sierra Leone's a very pretty part of the world, I think. We haven't built our plant as yet. Koos, an associate of Jim's, has designed a plant for us. But so at the moment we're using our bulk sampling plant. And here it is. So there's a primary crusher, secondary crusher. Sorry, that's a feed bin, primary crusher, secondary crusher. There's a dense media separation unit here. And then we've got two flow sort X-ray machines in here with a grease circuit as well, and then a sort room here. So it's pretty basic, but pretty effective. And we've had Ray Ferraris look at our diamonds in terms of breakage, and happily we're not doing very much damage to our diamonds through this plant, which is good. Somebody might ask me about XRT. Because our diamonds are quite small, most of them are quite small, although we have planned to be able to put XRT into our plant, we won't be doing that, certainly to start with. So looking at some of the diamonds, there's a small diamond on the left there in Kimberlite. At the top, we've got Kimberlites from the Tongo Dike 1 bulk sampling work, and then the first diamonds that we recovered from the return airway here. And these are some of the diamonds from previous bulk sampling exercises. Now, obviously, these are sorted a little bit, but we have a very, very high gem content. So if just as a summary of that, the gem content at Lando is well over 60%, measured as soarables and makeables combined. Kundu is just over 50%. The gem to near gem to industrial ratio at Lando is more like an alluvial deposit, in fact, than a kimberlite. It's so high. There's a very high proportion of whites, a few yellows, and a few browns. But the really great thing from our point of view is the number of collection goods, or very high top color Ds and Es is very, very high. At Lando, it's 50% of the soarables and makeables are collection stones, whilst Kundu has about 43%. So that's pretty good. And there's also there's a little pink stone there. That's just one that I'm aware of so far, but hopefully it's a precursor of more to come. And a couple of fancy yellows as well, but they're not a high proportion of the production. So just to finish, I'll sort of show you a few pictures. This is the entrance to the 6x4 meter joint decline. So that's about 150 meters, and then it splits to go to Kundu and Lando. The picture on the right is just looking out from there. This is drilling the development. So this is development tunnel drilling, not on the kimberlite, using one of these jumbo rigs. And then on the right is one of our, this is an underground dam. So all of the water that we encounter, and we don't encounter a great deal, is then piped into that dam and then pumped to surface. As I've mentioned, at the moment, we're really only looking at Kundu and Lando, these ore reserves. There's a much bigger mineral resource to a greater depth. And then beneath that exploration target, then we've got these other mineral resources which have yet to be, there's no technical studies done on those as yet, so they have the potential to become mineral reserves. And of course, they also have exploration targets at depth. And then other kimberlites that at the moment are exploration targets, so they've been drilled, they're diamondiferous. And then these dikes, which have very little drilling, but are known to be diamondiferous, or at least assumed to be so, because there's artisanal mining on them. So there's a lot of future exploration development work to go on this project. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your time on this, Mike. Sierra Leone is, as you say, a fascinating place. I've looked at some of the alluvials up there, and the kimberlites look just as exciting. Do we have any questions, comments, queries from anybody? Herman, I see you've unmuted yourself. Would you like to ask?
Yeah, I'd like to ask. Thanks, Mike. It was a great talk. Yeah, and you went through it at a great pace. If you're allowed to tell us, can you give us an estimate of how much you've spent in exploration and then in resource development, and then also in capital costs to develop your decline now that you've gone into your first sale process?
Sure, I can. I can't give you an exact figure, Herman, because a lot of the work wasn't done by us, and I don't have those exact figures. But it's in the region of about $60 million as of today.
Wow. So that's under the new field flag?
No. So that includes what we think was spent by Koidu as well. Oh,
I see. Okay, great.
Yeah.
And what do you still have to spend, Mike, roughly?
Well, that's a tougher question, John, because what's happened over the last 3 years? Well, first of all, capital has been very hard to come by, and so you start one of these projects and you think you've got the capital lined up, and then the providers of the capital start delaying delivery of the capital, and it slows everything down, and so you start spending money faster than the progress that you expected to make with it. That's the first problem. And then COVID comes along and makes it even more difficult. So, and I don't want to blame COVID because that's a bit of a cop out, but it really has made life quite difficult for us. If you're trying to fly people in and out and that sort of thing. The money that we need to get into full production, the last figure, well, I'm not sure. I'm not sure it's a public figure, so I probably shouldn't tell you. I'll just check if it's a public figure and I'll let you know. Okay. But it's not a massive amount of money if you want to invest.
Okay, we're lining up.
We have a question in the chat box.
Yeah.
When do you call a kimberlite a fisher?
When you're not English, I think. I don't know. I've always called them dikes because that's what I may use the word fisher interchangeably now, but I prefer the word dike myself. But I know certainly in South Africa they seem to be called fishers, so I don't know. Jim, you may have a comment on that, or John, or somebody.
Well, my next question was going to be, I mean, do you see remnants of blows or, indication of blows along your portion that you're talking about there?
So the Kundu and Lando dikes, we haven't seen anything as yet. That doesn't mean to say they're not there because we've drilled at 50-meter centers. So there could be something small there. But the one that has been mined by Koidu, and they just took it out because it was there. It wasn't very big. I think it was about 40 meters across or so. Very high grade. And they mined it to about, I guess, 80 meters, something like that, not particularly deep. So there's that one. And then there's another one that's reported by PK Hall on one of the other dikes. But we haven't been able to locate that, but we haven't looked very hard. I mean, it's we haven't drilled for it or anything.
And I mean, all of those diamonds, as I recall, are characteristically rather nice, Mike. I mean, they're an excellent population.
They really are. Our population is quite different to Koidu's, I must say. Koidu definitely have type 2s, and we don't. At least I don't think we do. The biggest stone, and I haven't been able to trace the source of this information, the biggest diamond that I've heard of from Tongo, I think was 30-something carats, a little under 40 carats. But that's, I can't confirm that. The biggest stone that we've recovered so far is only, I think, 9.5 carats or something.
There's
beautiful stones. Yeah.
There's another question come up. How were the dikes discovered? By mapping or geophysics? And if you could sort of take us through some of the early exploration as well as the stuff that you guys have been doing.
So, so when Sierra Leone Selection Trust were doing all their prospecting work back in the 50s, they discovered diamonds, and I guess they were probably using pleats jigs or something in those days. And they recovered diamonds in the Moa River, which flows down through. It flows into the Mano River. So they found diamonds there, and they followed those diamonds upstream, basically. So they took their pleats jigs, took samples, and recovered diamonds. And as they went up I think the Malay River, they got to a confluence of the Tongo River. As they followed the Malay River upstream, there were no more diamonds, but they found them in the Tongo River, which is quite a small stream, really, and so on. And then they followed that into the Lando stream, and then found these very high-grade alluvial deposits. Everything that they basically sampled was full of diamonds. And I think digging down through that material, they came across weathered kimberlite. So that's how they discovered them. In those days, there was no geophysics, I don't think. I stand to be corrected if anybody knows otherwise, but that's how I understand it was done.
Mike, is there any indicator mineral chemistry?
Not that I'm aware of, Craig. If any student would like to collect some samples and look at that, they'd be most welcome. as far as I know, there isn't any. I'll have a look at. Are you aware of the master's thesis that was done recently?
No, which volume was that? Is that a student at one of our masters?
I think it's a student at. I'd have to check.
It's not Farnus.
No, it's not Farnus. No,
Okay,
it's a young student. I think it's at UCT, but I'll have to check.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
And Mike, I mean, working in Sierra Leone these days, obviously it's had quite a history. I mean, have you been well supported and accommodated? And
you know, John, I was amazed because I was really expecting Sierra Leone to be a difficult place to go. Based, you know, as you say, I mean, you think of Sierra Leone, you think of blood diamonds, you think of Ebola. A few years ago, they had that dreadful landslide in Freetown, which killed a lot of people. So, you know, the only time people really hear about Sierra Leone is from terrible things. But actually, it's a wonderful place to work. It's the people are friendly. I think having been through a civil war, people will do anything to avoid that scenario again. The government is extremely supportive. You know, I would love to say that South Africa had anything close to what Sierra Leone has. They have a proper cadastral system, and they bend over backwards to help you in terms of the technocrats at the mining agency, National Mining Agency. So really positive things to be said. Politicians are politicians, but they come and go. So they're you know, some of the current mines minister is brilliant. He pops in to say hello regularly, and he's very friendly. His predecessor wasn't quite so good. So, you know, that's a bit of a lottery, the ministry. But the people that you deal with most of the time in terms of the technocrats are great, really good.
Oh, that's good to hear.
There's another question that's come up. What did you use to estimate mineable dike thickness?
So what we did was we looked at the drilling intersections and looked at how much waste and kimberlite there was, and looked at the grade of the kimberlite, and based on those parameters, so long as the dike thickness was a minimum of 0.85 of a meter, in other words, the minimum stope width, and as long as the grade was above the total grade, diluted grade, including the waste, was above 0.4 of a carat per ton, then we included it in the resource.
And Andy Moore has just popped something into the chat. He reckons that the student did his thesis at UCT under Jeff Howarth.
That sounds right. I've got a copy of the thesis if anybody is interested in seeing it. I'm not sure if I presume I'm allowed to share it. I don't know. Maybe rather you should ask UCT rather than me.
Okay, we'll ask Jeff. I mean, we're regularly in contact with him. That's great. Thanks for that info, Andy.